Hey, everybody, Dr. Mueller here. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this masterclass on brain fog and fatigue. It's one of the things that I like to talk about the most because, frankly, it's one of the things that across the board I feel like I see over and over and over again in my client population. And there's a lot of root causes, there's a lot of mistakes people make. But unfortunately, with things like brain fog, unfortunately, we have a huge discrepancy between what we're told oftentimes in medicine and what's, say, actually happening in the human body. And we're going to get into this, right? So we're going to get into this. We're going to cover so much today. So thank you for being here. One of the things that I want to make sure to start with that I think is just really important when it comes to brain fog, and fatigue's a little bit different, but when it comes to the brain fog component of it, is that unfortunately we are in a problem where conventionally we're not really told that this particular excuse me, we're not really told that this particular disease process exists, right? So in medicine, when we learn about, like when we're in medical school, we learn about things like brain dysfunction. We basically learn about dementia and we learn about something called mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment can be likened to brain fog. So mild cognitive impairment is where we're not remembering things as well. We might not perform as well on mental tests. Perhaps we're forgetting where our keys are. So there's some overlap with brain fog and mild cognitive impairment. But in conventional medicine and like what we learn in medical school is largely with mild cognitive impairment is if you do test somebody for this, which you do only with questionnaires, that essentially you get this label and it's like a watch and wait until you're bad enough, if you get bad enough, to use a dementia related drug. So unfortunately, and the point of this is it's really disturbing. I think it's really disturbing. It's really sad. It's really unfortunate that right now, the way we're looking in medicine at brain fog is, one, we don't even kind of diagnose it a lot of times, medically speaking. And two, if we do, the way you diagnose it medically speaking is by giving the label mild cognitive impairment. And if you give that label, then largely the treatment that's available conventionally is just watch and wait. And that's why I really like doing these types of webinars. That's why I talk about brain fog and cognitive dysfunction in my book, really is because there's this huge gap right now between like, hey, we have symptoms, and the time to, of course, treat that and prevent things like dementia is now, right? So if you're having these things, and thank you so much for showing up, thank you for so much for registering and being part of this, because with these types of symptoms, it's really important to take action right away, because what we're trying to do is we're working to stop this and reverse it at mild cognitive impairment before it reaches something like dementia, right? Because it is harder the more these diseases progress, the more it does get harder and harder to reverse. Not saying it's not possible. There's always hope. And there's always, like ideas that we can do to get to the root cause, but it's good to take this kind of stuff seriously when the symptoms are brain fog or mild cognitive impairment, before they potentially could progress to something, much worse. And, fatigue and brain fog often are this vicious cycle, right? So there's often this vicious cycle where it's almost like this chicken and the egg, right? We have fatigue, and that fatigue can be worsening our brain function, that we might be making mistakes and not doing things correctly. That leads to more stress, leading to more fatigue, and on and on and on. So that's kind of the intro to what we're going to talk about today. So please do get your hand out. Let me get my screen share going here. So essentially, hopefully you guys all got your hand out. I did email that to you separately, but no worries if you did not. So we're going to go through here how to access that. And essentially what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover like the top 5 causes. I'm going to cover one of them really thoroughly. There's not time to go through all of them really thoroughly today, but I'm going to cover all of them so you get that. And then I'm going to go through one of them much more thoroughly so you get a little deep dive. And then I'm going to give you, things at the end where you can continue to learn and get educated about what are the things that we don't cover. So I want to make sure that you guys all have your worksheet. So if you do not have your worksheet, I'm going to actually copy this link and put it into the chat for you. So there's that worksheet in the chat for you. And so essentially what this worksheet is going to be is a couple different things. One, as we go through this material, you can fill in the gaps. So I left out some blanks that are good to fill in. Two, if you turn this in after class, I will send you a bonus that I will announce at the end of this particular masterclass. Okay, so the first thing is, so let's start with the first root cause. And this is also going to be a worksheet answer. We're going to go through the 5 root causes. Like I said, we're going to go through one really deep. We're going to talk about testing, what you're missing, and more. And I hope you guys really take all this to heart, because like I said, we want to catch it here before it turns into something more severe. So the number one root cause, chronic hidden infections. So chronic hidden infections, and as much as like COVID and that whole disaster of COVID was exactly that. It was like a disaster, right? But as much as all of that was a disaster, everything in life, of course, has things we can learn from it. And one of the things that I feel like COVID did was it allowed people to understand that some of these, that infections can be chronic, right? Because what we saw with some people with COVID, where there were these long haulers, and still are, where people were just having a really hard time getting over something, even though it was very far past the infection. That same situation for other infections can happen all the time, right? Can happen all the time. And one of the things that's really important in looking for this, right? One of the things that's really important in looking for things like infections is, I don't know if you guys have ever had this thing with fatigue where somebody says to you something like, come on, you're tired? Like, we all get tired sometimes. Or why can't you just come out on a walk? It's only half an hour. It's a short walk, right? So there's like that social pressure. And sometimes having, understanding the cause not only can provide like internal relief and give actionable steps, but it's a lot easier to explain to somebody when you're tired, when your brain doesn't work. And they're like, well, my brain gets tired sometimes too. Like, I have a long work day, right? So sometimes it's really, there's almost this like gaslighting type of response that we can get from other people, because fatigue is something that every human experiences. Sometimes the brain being a little bit less clear is something that people experience at times, right? So it's very, very difficult to understand the level of fatigue and the level of brain fog that really truly come with these disease processes unless you go through them. So that's one great thing about chronic hidden infections, is it really can help with that. Now, when we are saying the top chronic infections, so on your sheet under number 2, chronic infections goes there. Let's talk about the top chronic infections. And I'm going to go through some of these more thoroughly. So Borrelia is Lyme disease. I'm not going to talk about that one as much thoroughly here, because I talk about that in other lessons and other things I do. Hidden viruses, though, are an important one to spend a little more time on. So these are things like COVID I mentioned, and COVID's very, very interesting, because one of the things that I think might be happening, and this is theoretical, right? COVID is still this thing that we're still learning about so much in science. But what I'm seeing in some of my patients is they get COVID, and then all of a sudden things like Lyme symptoms flare, right? And they were better and they had no symptoms, and all of a sudden things that look Lyme-like come back, including chronic fatigue, or including being tired after walking, right? That post-exertional fatigue. Another thing that can happen with that is they get COVID and all of a sudden the brain's not working. There's body aches and they just keep lasting. And it looks also like Lyme. And then we start retreating the Lyme, and that's actually helping this long haul COVID. So I work with a very unique segment of people that tend to be very sick and have a lot of symptoms. So I'm not saying, what I'm noticing is in my unique patient population, but I'm definitely theorizing that another thing that can complicate things, especially when it comes to COVID in this long haul scenario that is linked to everything we're talking about, is potentially that COVID as a virus is like diverting the immune system. So the immune system's busy, say, fighting COVID. And all of a sudden, that is allowing Lyme to resurge. We also see in research that viruses are a huge thing that turn genes on and off. So we're going to talk about things like detox later and how toxins can, depending upon what our genes are doing, the toxins can build up in our body more. And we see that viruses can turn genes on and off. There's studies on this. So I'm also curious with what I'm seeing practically in my clinic, like how much COVID is actually causing genes to essentially that are toxin related genes that help us detox. So COVID turns detox genes off. All of a sudden we're not detoxing as much, right? And so when that happens, these toxins can build up in the body, and that potentially could be worsening all these symptoms. So with some of these disease processes, some of these hidden viruses, things like EBV, which is the virus that causes mono, with some of these disease processes like this, one of the other concerns is this, if we have a reactivation of mono, it could be the mono, sure, but it also could be how these viruses actually interact with our genetics, with our ability to detox, with our immune system's ability to fight other things. So it leads to this other long-term sequelae of problems. Bartonella, for those of you that don't know Bartonella is a bacterial infection. Bartonella is actually the bacteria that causes cat scratch disease. So that old song from, I believe it was the 70s that came out, the song Cat Scratch Fever, that's part of what that song is relating to, is Bartonella, or is referring to. Bartonella also comes from insect bites and that sort of thing. But Bartonella is not another one that's not classically looked at. And what Bartonella will do is it will cause a lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is about draining toxins. It's also about infections and circulating white blood cells effectively. What Bartonella does is it slows down the lymphatic system. And when it slows down the lymphatic system, what winds up happening is toxins do not flow as well through the body. When toxins do not flow as well through the body, then essentially you can have brain fog, you can have fatigue because you become more and more toxic. One of the things that we also see is that toxins build up in the brain. We see a lot of this in some of the longer term dementia, Alzheimer's scenarios, right? And so the lymphatics of the brain are essential to work to help drain those toxins out through the neck and back into the lymphatic and circulatory system. And Bartonella can potentially slow down that process. So hugely related to that. Toxoplasma brings me to the conversation on parasites. So parasites, it's very, very interesting how we work with parasites in the United States, because parasites are so common. Toxoplasma, this parasite, it's estimated in one study that 80% of 80-year-olds have this. And it's estimated because of how commonly we are exposed to this particular parasite. So the longer you live, the more exposure, the more likely it is that you have this particular bug. In fact, my friend and colleague, who's an MD who was trained over in Europe, she was telling me that in medical school over there, she was taught that twice a year you should do anti-parasitic type of protocols, because everybody just knows that people get parasites and there's not a proper test for every parasite that exists in the world. So over in like her training, it was like, just give anti-parasitics, because that will rule out certain cases of things. And some of these parasites, this is so gross, and people get really freaked out when I say this. So try not to get freaked out, but these parasites burrow and they can get into the brain. So I don't say that to scare you. I say that to educate you, right? We're talking about brain fog. So we get these parasites in the brain. Well, guess what? We can get them out. So that's how hopefully we are not, scaring you. Okay. So Then we see the last one here is H. pylori. So H. pylori is a gastrointestinal bug. So essentially it is a bacteria, tends to live in the stomach, and it can cause a lot of things like heartburn, and ulcers are really common symptoms it can cause, but it can cause a lot of other digestive upset and dysfunction, and things like leaky gut, where we're not absorbing the nutrients. So I wanted to make sure to throw something in here for sure from a nutrient standpoint, because the moment we have gastrointestinal infections, we don't get our nutrients absorbed correctly. We don't have the nutrients to, say, fund the mitochondria. For example, the mitochondria are those powerhouses of cells. Mitochondria need B vitamins. They need NAD, which is a form of one of the B vitamins. They need CoQ10. They need carnitine. There's a lot of different nutrients that are needed for the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, to work. When we have infections like H. pylori, for example, in the gut's inflamed, it gets leaky, we're not absorbing nutrients, powerhouse of the cell is not working. And then we have fatigue, literally because our cells cannot do their job. So I want to share a little bit about this client of mine right now, because sometimes I find that when I talk about some of these things like parasites in the brain, for example, people can get really, really, really scared, right? And again, like, I don't say that to scare you. I want to make sure that I'm leaving our conversation today with you feeling like hope, like there's answers. And so this was a client of mine. This was what she was saying. She had gone to 20 specialists over 3 years. She couldn't get the correct diagnosis. And then we got her the diagnosis very, very, very quickly. And we're able to get her into the treatment. And so this is really what happens when we figure out the root cause. And it's also related to this whole story around like brain fog, and conventional medicine really is just looked at sometimes as mild cognitive impairment, watch and wait. And that's really scary with this stuff. Like, to me, that's very, very scary to say my brain's not working. I'm just going to wait to see if it gets worse and that there's a medication for me, right? I really don't like that at all for people. So, the idea is with all of this is the point is get you the education, get you the answers. You guys can really heal from this stuff. It's very, very exciting. There's even some really cool studies on animals that are coming out that are actually showing potential for reversing Alzheimer's, right? So hopefully we'll get to that point where, even that far gone, we can reverse. But right now, that's still pretty new. Okay, so now back to our worksheet. So we talked about root cause number 1, infections, right? And these, I didn't give you every infection out there that's related to chronic fatigue and brain fog. These are just some of the top things that I see people not thinking about all the time, because oftentimes when we're thinking about chronic fatigue and brain fog, a lot of people think about thyroid or adrenal glands, adrenal gland function. And so a lot of times people have had those basics looked at and things aren't better yet. So I'm trying to help you fill in some gaps. So another thing is sleep or mouth problems. And this can lead to low oxygen, which can cause fatigue and brain fog. It can also lead to infections in the mouth. So what's really interesting is if we sleep with our mouth open, then what winds up happening is that actually changes the microbiome. It changes the good bacteria that are in our mouth and in our sinus cavity. And essentially, because the bacteria here, a lot of these, the ones that we want, grow in an anaerobic environment, meaning they grow when there's not a lot of continued oxygen source. Obviously, there's oxygen in there all the time, but these bacteria, the ones we want to really live in there, a lot of them for the proper balance, we want our mouth closed at night so that there's not a lot of oxygen traveling through there, so we can make sure to populate, especially since our mouth is open during the day, the proper amount of the non-oxygen bacteria to help prevent dental disease and teeth problem, periodontal disease, cavities, those sorts of things. So when our mouth is open at night, one of the things that can happen is we can actually change the oxygen balance of our mouth, which actually will change those microbes. Okay, when we change those microbes, the good guys, infections can more likely set in. And infections can more likely set in. When infections get in here, well, guess what? The brain membrane that separates everything mouth and sinuses to the skull is so thin that is a good way of getting infections, toxins, or at least inflammatory processes into the brain. So here's where we get to your inexpensive way to actually really help oxygen flow, better sleep, these sorts of things. And the answer is mouth tape. You can literally go on Amazon, buy something, look up mouth tape. And it's a little bit weird, you guys. It's a little bit weird the first time you wear it. It's just like, you just kind of put this piece of tape this way over your mouth. But it's like a little bit weird to get used to. It's really not that big of a deal. And what's interesting to me is how well this simple stuff works. Like what you can actually notice and what I see people notice with energy coming up, with fatigue improving, this sort of thing. Again, they're like, we want to look at all of the root causes. So I've never seen a situation where this is like the only root cause, but certainly something like mouth tape can really help solve this particular problem. Super duper easy. Okay, so now let's get to root cause number 3. So I wanted to, like I said, like adrenal hormones, sex hormones, you guys, some of you guys have already tested for some of these things, thyroid hormones, but we need to at least mention the hormones because these things can absolutely be related to fatigue and absolutely be related to brain health. Like if you're not sleeping, for example, properly, if you're not getting enough deep sleep, which is why we mentioned that on the last, like number 2, if you're not getting enough deep sleep, that alone can cause everything we're talking about here, right? So it's really important to consider that. Now, one of the things that I wanted to make sure of is one of the things when it comes to these hormones, one of the things that I see be extremely problematic for people is doing tests like these for hormones, but not doing proper tests. The results of tests are only as good as the test that is ordered and the clinician that is essentially helping you understand them. And so essentially with thyroid, a lot of people are only measuring TSH. TSH is a brain hormone. It's not thyroid hormone. So you're basically measuring with the TSH, what you're measuring is your brain's ability to tell the thyroid what to do. Sometimes the brain, TSH hormone, tells the thyroid what to do. The thyroid doesn't respond. So the brain could be signaling totally right, and the thyroid's just not doing what it's supposed to do. So we don't also test the thyroid hormones. We can miss thyroid disease a lot of the time. So proper thyroid testing needs these 3 things at a minimum. So these are the things for your worksheet answer: TSH, free T3, free T4. And if you guys are getting behind on any of these worksheet answers, don't worry, I will email them to you later, but I would encourage you to write them down because if you send them in, I will give you a bonus, like I said. Okay, so TSH, free T3, free T4. Now there's other thyroid markers that are also valuable to consider, right? So there's other things that we do for the thyroid for testing. I'm just talking bare minimum, bare bones minimum. This is what you need to really begin to start to understand what's happening. If you don't have at least these 3 things, it's very, very difficult to say if your thyroid is working correctly. Root cause number 4. Okay, so this is what we are going to spend a lot of the remainder of our time on today is root cause number 4 is a genetic predisposition in our ability to metabolize or process toxins. So your worksheet says a genetic predisposition, and it says not MTHFR. So let's break down what that means, and your worksheet answer is on the screen there. Okay, so MTHFR, a lot of people have heard of this gene. It has a big bad reputation online as being this big bad bear that prevents people from detoxing. Partially true. And what I'm talking about with this particular worksheet answer is way beyond MTHFR. MTHFR essentially is an anomaly in a gene that causes you to activate folate. Folate is used for detoxification. Correct. Folate is necessary sometimes to help you make glutathione. Folate is necessary sometimes to help you make methyl donors. Methyl donors run detox and processes all over the body. And when I say sometimes, why I'm saying that is because The body is so good at backup plans. The body is amazing at backup plans. So when we have a defect in this folate enzyme, this folate gene, and we can't activate folate into its active form called the methyl form, when we have all of that, essentially, we have a backup plan. It's called TMG. And so essentially our body will continue to make things like methyl donors, things like glutathione, these other components of detox the body can make, even if we do not have folate, right? We have this backdoor plan. So folate's important, but this whole thing around folate not detoxing, not totally true, partially true, not totally true. So what do I mean by a defect in our ability to metabolize or process toxins? This is super interesting, you guys. Some people genetically have a defect where they can't process pesticides, or they have a defect where they can't process glyphosate, like what's used in genetically modified foods, or they can't process plastics, or they can't process mold toxins, right? So some people have these types of defects. For me, I have a defect that does not allow me to process pesticides. I have a few other defects, but I have a genetic defect that does not allow me to process pesticides completely. And it's so interesting because I can taste on things, especially that are heavily pesticide sprayed, like a lot of apples are heavily pesticide sprayed. If I eat an unorganic apple, I can actually taste the pesticide. It's so gross. I can tell like instantly if it's organic or not, if there's any cross contamination, because I can literally taste the pesticide in my mouth. So I'm very, very careful about certain organic foods that are unorganic foods that are heavily sprayed. It's good to eat the, organic foods as much as possible, but the ones that are heavily sprayed are particularly important to avoid, but especially for somebody like me. So somebody like me eating an apple, eating something that's more heavily sprayed becomes a bigger problem than somebody that does not have a gene like me, right? Somebody that does not have a gene like me, they are able to eat something like a pesticide food. Still not good for you, right? I don't want to give that impression. Still not ideal. You still have to detox it, but they're going to have an easier time eradicating it. And there's more room for error, meaning there's more room for them to say, eat something that is not, not organic and not have a symptom than somebody with my genetics. So when it comes to these toxins building up, remember, this is all related back to things that are making our cells not work for energy, the toxins getting into our brain that causes brain fog, right? So these toxins directly impact what we're talking about today. But in the context of what this is really looking to say, okay, for the uniqueness of you, for every single person that's on the call, every single person probably has some genetic anomaly for a particular toxin or a few toxins that is preventing them from detoxing those things, right? None of us are genetically perfect. All of us have these anomalies, and that's what makes us unique. That's why one person brain fog can be worse than if they smell a chemical like a perfume. Another person, it's like if they're in a moldy room. Another person, it could be a pesticide. And this can all be related to these genetic defects. So the value of knowing this, right, is then knowing areas of your life where you can get away with more from a lifestyle perspective, areas of your life where it's like, okay, we still want to choose good things, but areas of your life where there's like more or less wiggle room because of what's going on genetically. So it's going to teach you all of that. And like I said, like what we see is these toxins, they will get into the body, they will get into the bloodstream, they will cause all sorts of different problems. And we even see, for example, we see like in long-term dementia, right? In long-term things like Alzheimer's, things that are really bad that I hope we can avoid for all of you guys. We see scenarios where people wind up having these plaques form in Alzheimer's. And we know plaques have this immunological property to them, right? So we form plaques in Alzheimer's. The thought is perhaps it's a way of trapping infections and toxins. And of course, this backfires, and some people get Alzheimer's from it. But some of these genetic things, there's also studies, and this is also like again, not designed to scare you, designed to educate you. There are also studies that are showing that what's happening to the brain when we get some of these toxins in the brain, literally it's killing nerve cells. And when nerve cells die, the processes of the nerves talking and communicating and sending the signal to make cortisol or make thyroid, or sending the signal to cause the body to flush itself of toxins or other things, all those signals get shut down. Right? Nerves dying in the brain does not make you think very well. So this is how this is all related. So how are you going to get toxins like this, or in tests like this? So yeah, this is really, really interesting. Unfortunately, insurance, I'm going to talk to you about tests, and there's a bonus I can get you. There's a lab company that's running special on these tests. So stay tuned, because I have a really good thing for you to get tested right now. But I was listening, it's very interesting. Like, I was listening to a podcast recently where there was a doctor who was being interviewed, and this doctor was talking about how he wanted to run tests like this. This was a standard doctor. And this doctor was talking about how he wanted to run tests like we're talking about this, but how he was frustrated that he couldn't because insurance would not let him. So a lot of these kind of tests are not ordered by conventional medicine because insurance is like basically demanding, insurance is running what a lot of conventional docs are allowed to test because they won't cover them. So they tell docs not to run them because they're not going to be covered. So then this podcast I was listening to recently, it was like this doctor that was he was conventional medicine. He was just expressing this large amount of frustration about seeing and hearing about stuff like this, but then not being able to actually order things like this because insurance wouldn't let him. So there's so many problems here, but I am going to give you a solution today. So hopefully that is, hopefully this will help solve at least some of that gap. Okay, so toxins. So we talked about genetic toxins, and now the other component is what is actually built up. So there's two parts to this. There's the part from a standpoint of brain fog, chronic fatigue, all these things. There's this part that I told you about around like genetics, and because of your genetics, maybe you're building up pesticides in your body and your brain, like I have a tendency to. Right, so you're genetically predisposed. Then the other, the other question is, what toxins are actually in your body? So what are you predisposed to? Gives you information on the things to avoid more strongly. It helps you design your lifestyle where it's like we all have to be in the world, right? I am a big proponent of we all need to be in the world. We want to live these human lives. We want to experience life. I truly believe that's the beautiful part of being a human, is getting to experience the world. And so the genetics allow us to design our lifestyle. Helps us make future-oriented choices. We get to design our lifestyle based upon what we know. So we design our lifestyle saying, okay, I can't do pesticides for my genetics, or I need to avoid mold because of my genetics, or I have to be very extra careful about never buying a plastic water bottle because of my genetics. So it allows us to know where we need to pick and choose for our lifestyle. Then toxins, same kind of concept, but actually doing tests to measure the toxins in your body allows you to fix what is from the past. So genetics helps us give information about the future. Running tests to see what toxins are in your body allows you to see, okay, because you didn't know this, because you've been exposed, because we are in a world that unfortunately is accumulating more and more toxins, running a toxin test in your body allows you to see what you need to clean up because of your past exposures. So it's future plus past, right? So that's what's really cool about looking at all this. Both future and past are related to the same things: toxins getting to the brain, those nerve cells dying, as well as toxins doing things like causing our mitochondria not to work, which unfortunately I feel like happens so many times, where those toxins are really taking, because everything in the body, the way I describe it, you guys, is like there's so many things that are energetically expensive, right? And what I mean by that is it takes energy to detox from a cellular level. Your cells have to burn through B vitamins and other nutrients in order to rid themselves of toxins. The mitochondria, which produces energy, also needs things like B vitamins in order to produce energy for you. So if your body is so toxic that it's using all of your nutrients to try to get these toxins out of you. You're not going to have the same level of nutrients in you to give the mitochondria the energy, the cellular energy it needs to work. So when I say things, sometimes I say in podcasts and interviews that toxins are energetically expensive. And that's what I'm talking about, is they take these nutrients away from these other processes in your cells that allow you to have the energy. So it's not just about the toxin, it's about what it's robbing your other cells of, right? So there's a multi-layer impact. Okay, so we're almost done with your handout. So the bonus for your worksheet, I'm going to tell you about that first. But this is one of the reasons why I wanted to run this webinar right now, is because one of my lab companies that I'm partnered with is offering a special, and this special is a free genetic toxin test. Now, there is a catch to this that I need to tell you about, to be totally transparent, but they're offering this free genetic test, and the genetics, then we can say this in this genetic test, it's going to basically tell us, okay, these are the things in the future to avoid, so you can design your lifestyle and still live in the world and know what's important to avoid, know what is not, right? And so this can help long-term prevent things like dementia, prevent things like cognitive issues, prevent things like depression, all these brain-related things, and prevent things like chronic fatigue. So what's the catch? So the catch is the way this company is doing it, and this, you guys, is out of my control. I'm just, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just passing this information on, but it's a really good deal, and I hope you'll take advantage, because it's almost like 50% off of what you can get these tests for normally. So essentially, when you purchase their toxin test, which is heavy metals, mycotoxins, and environmental toxins, when you purchase the toxin test, they are adding on their genetic test for free. So it's basically 2 tests for the price of 1. They are only offering this until the end of this month. So we have like just a few more days left before they're not going to offer this anymore, which is why I wanted to get this information out to you guys, because I don't see this company run I've actually never seen this particular offer from this partner company of mine. So I wanted to make sure that you guys got this, because again, testing the toxins, telling you what you need to get rid of from the past, knowing the genetics, telling you what you need to get rid of or you need to avoid, how you need to manage your life in the future. So it's a really cool combination of tests to get to some of the root cause of the brain fog and cognitive dysfunction. So this is a QR code. I'm actually going to stop this PowerPoint just so I can put this link in the chat for you guys too, just in case this is easier. So there's that link for you. Let me start my slideshow again. So essentially, there's also a QR code that you can pull it up on your phone as well. But essentially, what you're going to get is you're going to get an understanding of the toxins that are built up, that are from the past, like I said, that are contributing to your fatigue and brain fog. All of your tests are going to be slightly different because you're all going to have different exposures and what you've built up. You're going to get a unique understanding of the genetics, so the future, the toxins you should avoid. And one of the things that I am throwing on for people right now is, if you get this test before this due date here in a couple of days, when they're not offering this anymore, I'm going to do a Q&A exclusively for you guys, where you can basically bring we'll go through the test. Your test, you won't have your test back yet, but essentially what we're going to do is I'm going to give you stuff like this. I'm going to give you a sample test to look at, and you're going to make notes. And you're going to make notes of, if your test says this, this is what it means. If your test says that, that's what it means. So then when you get to your test, you're going to know essentially what it means and what actions to take. So one of the things that, sometimes comes up, obviously, when this stuff is not insurance related, right? When we can't get this to, through our insurance, is it worth it? So this was a patient that saw me. She lost 35 pounds. She stopped benzodiazepine, stopped blood pressure medication. She stopped her steroids. She stopped her thyroid. So all of these things changed, right? So many things. She was off 4 medications, lost 35 pounds, had so much more energy. And I'm talking about this story because when I asked her, if it was worth it, her response was, you are worth it, right? Your health is worth it. So that's a really, like I said, I know it's always a complicated thing when insurance doesn't cover these things. So I try what I can do to give you guys offers like this when I come up against them, to try to help you guys as much as possible. But this is another person. It's like, this is somebody that he didn't have many symptoms, but his big symptom was a power walker. And as a power walker, one of the things he was realizing was like, he could never make certain turns. He could never make, I think it was left turns, if I remember his story correctly. And every time he would try to make a turn, his hip would go out, right? It was just one way and his hip would go out. So we worked on a lot of this and we started figuring it out. And we figured it out and eventually he was good. And then I had another patient, which was like a very similar type of story, but he ended up not doing anything about it. And in the end, the last I had heard from him, we never really worked together, but the last I had heard, he had to have multiple hips replaced. And with PT and all those things, it cost him $100,000 outside of insurance. So unfortunately, the way our medical model is set up is like, people unfortunately pay for it one way or another. So I feel like my job, like I said, is really to educate you, to help you keep this cost contained so you can spend a little money now versus a lot of money later. And like I said, it's also about being able to develop your lifestyle around this. So essentially, if you turn in your handout, then what you're going to get, and we will send this to you here in the next few days. It might be Monday before my team gets to send it to you. But essentially, I'm also going to put this in the chat. So basically, you want to copy this from the chat. But essentially, if you turn in your handout, by an hour after class today, what I will give you is I'll get you a $20 off coupon for any class or any education product in my store. I have a lot of education products, so you'll get a coupon to use for more education classes of how to work with chronic fatigue, of how to work with brain fog. So definitely send in that handout to us at support@platinumself.com if you want that. And then essentially, the other thing that is like good to know that I wanted to offer to you guys, in addition to essentially, so the test is $576 is what that is for the 2 tests. So it's 2 for the price of 1. And so I know that's definitely an investment. There was no way to sugarcoat that, but it would be twice that without that. So you're going to get mold, glyphosates, pesticides, herbicides, all of those things you're going to look for. You're going to get the genetic markers. We're going to get the bonus of the follow-up masterclass with me. And the other thing that I will also throw in for you guys, if you guys sign up and get this right now, because I just want you guys to have so much value from this. The other thing that I'm going to get you guys is I will get you a month membership into my online Lyme, mold, chronic infection, fatigue program, where essentially you get more videos that are like this, that are going to go into some of these other topics, right? So it's like fatigue, brain fog. So we talked about thyroid, but we didn't really talk about some of those other markers to look out for. So you're going to see courses on that. You're going to see courses on some of those infections, what to do about them. So that's the other thing that I will get you guys is, in addition to these tests, I will help you guys. I'll get you a free month membership into that, so you can really have the ability to get more education to help fill in the gaps. And then there's Q&As with that as well. So besides that, let me just see if there's any other questions. I want to make sure that you guys have this link. So hopefully everybody got this link. And I think that's all for today. So I will be looking out for those handouts. My team will be looking out for those handouts. Thank you so much for attending this today. And I hope this has been really useful. And I really hope you guys will take advantage of this offer. Again, like I want you guys to be well. I want to stop this when it's brain fog, when it's fatigue, and when it hasn't progressed to much, much scarier things, which we can do. There's hope. There's hope. There's hope. There's hope. There's so much community in my circle of people that you'll see in the online forum as well, which I've also found that working with community and being in situations where there's community sometimes it's just so nice to talk to other people that understand that, oh, chronic fatigue is not just like you're having a bad day and you're a little tired and you can't go for a long walk. You just need to push through it, right? That's sometimes what happens when we talk to people that are trying to understand, but really can't. And so that's the other thing I've seen in people that join this and join the platform that I'm giving you a month membership, is you find other people in there in discussion that can really help support and make you feel like you're normal, like you're not crazy, and like you're really deeply understood, because these types of processes tend to be really hard for people to understand. So thank you again for being here. I appreciate you all. I wish you the best with your healing. And if you have any problems with this code, of course, reach out to us, but I checked everything, so it should be working. I'll see you in another webinar.